The boardroom erupts as Vivian Sterling stands between Marcus and the board members who want him gone. "This plumber saved our company $50 million, she declares, her voice cutting through corporate protocol. Behind her, Marcus grips his daughter Sophie's hand, while 12 executives demand his removal. The server room he identified as vulnerable lies destroyed, exactly as he predicted. Outside, news vans gather as the scandal breaks. A 7-year-old girl's drawing of pipes and dreams sits on the CEO's desk, the unlikely catalyst that started everything. One woman risks her empire for a single father who sees what others miss. How did a routine faucet repair lead to this moment? Drop a comment with where you're watching from. The emergency alarm shrieked through the Meridian Tech headquarters at exactly 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. Red lights flashed across every floor of the 40-story glass tower as water began cascading down the main stairwell like a waterfall unleashed from hell. Marcus Thompson was replacing a faucet in the executive bathroom when chaos erupted around him. At 34, he had the weathered hands of someone who had worked with pipes since he was 16, and the tired eyes of a single father who hadn't slept properly in the 3 years since his wife Rebecca died. His work uniform bore the modest logo of Thompson Plumbing Services, the one-man operation he ran between school drop-offs and homework help for his 7-year-old daughter Sophie. The building's maintenance chief burst through the bathroom door, his face pale with panic that suggested catastrophe beyond a simple leak. "Marcus, thank God you're here. The main water line just ruptured. The whole building's flooding. Our emergency shutoff isn't responding. The entire server room is about to be underwater. That's $50 million in equipment that'll be destroyed in the next 10 minutes. Marcus dropped his wrench and followed the maintenance chief down the hallway, which had already accumulated an inch of water that was rising with alarming speed. His work boots splashed through the growing flood as his mind automatically cataloged the building's plumbing infrastructure, knowledge gained from 2 years of regular service calls to this corporate monument to technological achievement. The executive floor was in chaos. Employees were frantically grabbing laptops and documents, their expensive shoes slipping on wet marble floors as they rushed toward exits. Through the glass walls of the corner office, Marcus could see a woman standing perfectly still while everyone else ran. She was studying building schematics on her tablet, with the focused intensity of someone who refused to accept defeat, even as water pooled around her designer heels. That was his first glimpse of Vivian Sterling, though he didn't know her name yet. At 36, she was the youngest CEO in Meridian Tech's history, having built the company from a startup to a $3 billion enterprise in just 8 years. Her reputation for solving impossible problems was legendary in Chicago's business circles. But water damage was an enemy that couldn't be negotiated with or outmaneuvered through strategic planning. The emergency stairwell had become a vertical river. Water poured down with force that suggested a major arterial break somewhere in the building's infrastructure. The standard emergency protocols were failing because the electronic shutoff system had short-circuited. A devastating irony for a company that prided itself on technological solutions to every problem. "Where's the manual override?" Marcus asked the maintenance chief, who was practically hyperventilating as he watched millions of dollars in potential damage accumulating by the second. "There isn't one. The system was supposed to be foolproof. Everything's automated. The whole building runs on smart technology that monitors and controls all infrastructure systems. But the water got into the control panels. Everything's fried." Marcus processed this information with the calm that came from years of handling plumbing emergencies, though none quite on this scale. Every building, no matter how modern or sophisticated, operated on basic principles of water pressure and flow dynamics. Technology might control the systems, but physics governed the water itself. "I need access to the mechanical room," Marcus said decisively. "Not the control room, the actual mechanical space where the pipes enter the building. That's in the sub-basement. It's probably completely flooded by now. No one can get down there." Marcus was already moving toward the stairwell, calculating risks and possibilities with the speed of someone who had learned to think under pressure. The water was coming from above, not below, which meant the rupture was somewhere in the upper mechanical systems. The sub-basement might be wet, but it wouldn't be the source of the flooding. He descended through the chaos, passing employees who were evacuating in various states of panic. Some clutched coffee-stained laptops that had been saved from the deluge. Others simply ran, their professional composure abandoned in the face of natural force that technology couldn't control. The mechanical room was indeed flooding, but only with runoff from above. Marcus waded through knee-deep water, his experienced eyes tracking the massive pipes that fed the building's water systems. The configuration was complex, designed by engineers who had prioritized efficiency and automation over manual intervention capability. But Marcus saw what they had missed. There was an older section of piping, probably from the building's original construction before the high-tech renovation. It had been integrated into the new system, but retained its original manual valves, painted over and forgotten behind newer equipment. He forced his way through the narrow space between massive water heaters and HVAC units, the water now reaching his thighs. His hands found the valve he was looking for, seized with years of disuse and painted shut by maintenance crews who didn't even know it existed. Marcus pulled a pipe wrench from his tool belt, applying leverage with the practiced strength of someone who had wrestled with stubborn plumbing for half his life. The valve resisted, then grudgingly began to turn. 1 rotation, 2, 3. The sound of rushing water began to diminish, the torrent reducing to a stream, then a trickle, then nothing. The sudden silence was almost shocking after the chaos of the flood. Marcus stood in the mechanical room, soaked and exhausted, knowing he had just prevented a catastrophe that would have destroyed the technological heart of a major corporation. When he emerged from the mechanical room, he found the maintenance chief waiting with several security guards and what appeared to be half the executive team. They stared at him with expressions that mixed relief, disbelief, and something approaching awe. "How did you do that?" the maintenance chief asked. "Our best engineers couldn't figure out how to stop it without the automated systems." "Your building might run on technology," Marcus replied simply, "but water doesn't care about smartphones, apps, or automated controls. It follows the laws of physics, and those haven't changed since indoor plumbing was invented." Vivian Sterling appeared in the mechanical room doorway, having descended from her executive floor to see for herself who had saved her company from disaster. Her clothes were damp, but her composure remained intact, the kind of person who maintained authority even in crisis. "You're the plumber who was working on the executive floor," she said, her tone carrying assessment rather than question. "Marcus Thompson, Thompson Plumbing Services," he confirmed, suddenly aware of how he must look, soaked and muddy in his work clothes, while she managed to appear professionally composed despite the morning's chaos. "Mr. Thompson, you just saved my company approximately $50 million in equipment damage, not to mention the invaluable data on those servers. The building's insurance would have covered some losses, but the disruption to our operations would have been catastrophic." "I was just doing my job," Marcus replied, uncomfortable with the attention and eager to return to his normal routine of fixing leaks and unclogging drains. "Your job was to replace a faucet," Vivian corrected. "This was extraordinary problem-solving under pressure. How did you know about that manual valve?" "It wasn't on any of our current building schematics." Marcus shrugged slightly, the gesture of someone unaccustomed to explaining intuition built from years of experience. When you work with enough buildings, you learn that the old systems are usually still there underneath the new technology. People add layers of complexity, but rarely remove the original infrastructure completely. I suspected there had to be manual controls from before the renovation. Vivian studied him with the intense focus she usually reserved for analyzing market disruptions or acquisition targets. Here was someone who had solved in minutes what her entire technical team couldn't handle, using knowledge and instincts that couldn't be programmed into any algorithm. "I'd like to discuss a business proposition with you, Mr. Thompson. Would you be available for a meeting tomorrow morning?" Marcus thought of his schedule. the service calls already booked, the reality of running a one-man operation that barely covered his and Sophie's expenses. I have appointments scheduled. My customers depend on me. I understand you're a sole proprietor, Vivian continued with the persistence that had built a billion-dollar company. What if I could offer you something that would more than compensate for rescheduling those appointments? This conversation could be worth your while. Marcus hesitated, then noticed the water damage throughout the mechanical room, the destroyed equipment that would need replacement, the massive plumbing repairs that would be necessary to prevent future disasters. If you're thinking about hiring me for the repairs, I should tell you up front that a job this size is beyond what my operation can handle. You need a major commercial contractor, not a one-man plumbing service. That's not what I have in mind, Vivian replied with a smile that suggested she was already several moves ahead in whatever game she was playing. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, my office. We'll make it worth your time, I promise. As Marcus drove home that afternoon in his van with Thompson Plumbing Services painted on the sides in fading letters, he couldn't stop thinking about the morning's events. He had been servicing the Meridian Tech building for 2 years, handling the small repairs and maintenance tasks that the big contractors couldn't be bothered with. It provided steady income that helped keep him and Sophie afloat, but nothing more. His phone rang as he pulled into the parking lot of Sophie's elementary school. It was his answering service, reporting that 3 customers had called about the appointments he would need to reschedule for tomorrow's meeting with Vivian Sterling. Each rescheduling meant potentially losing clients to competitors who could respond faster, but something about Vivian's intensity suggested this meeting might be important enough to take that risk. Sophie burst out of school with her usual enthusiasm, her backpack bouncing as she ran toward his van. She was small for 7, with her mother's bright eyes and infectious smile that could lift Marcus's spirits even on the hardest days. Daddy, guess what? We learned about the water cycle today. Did you know that the same water that dinosaurs drank is still around today? It just keeps cycling through clouds and rain and rivers and pipes. Marcus smiled at his daughter's excitement about something he worked with every day, but had never considered from such a perspective. That's pretty amazing, sweetheart. Water's been around longer than anything else we use. Mrs. Patterson says your job is important because you help water get where people need it, Sophie continued, as he buckled her into her booster seat. She said plumbers are like doctors for houses. The comparison made Marcus chuckle, though it also reminded him of how differently society valued those who fixed bodies versus those who fixed buildings. A doctor who had saved a $50 million facility would be celebrated as a hero. A plumber who did the same thing was just doing his job. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus sat at his kitchen table surrounded by paperwork that reflected the constant juggling act of single parenthood and small business ownership. Bills that needed paying, invoices that needed sending, estimates that needed writing. The phone call from Vivian Sterling's assistant confirming tomorrow's meeting seemed surreal among the mundane realities of his daily life. He pulled out his laptop, a 5-year-old model that Sophie used for homework and he used for basic business management, and searched for information about Vivian Sterling. The results were overwhelming. Dozens of articles about her rise in the tech industry, her innovative approaches to data management, her reputation for transforming problems into opportunities. One article particularly caught his attention, a profile in the Chicago Tribune that described her as brilliantly unconventional, someone who succeeded by seeing possibilities that others missed. The article mentioned that she had started Meridian Tech in her apartment while working night shifts as a security guard to pay rent, building the company through determination and insight rather than inherited advantages. The parallels to his own situation were both inspiring and daunting. Marcus had started Thompson Plumbing Services out of necessity after Rebecca's death, when the flexibility of self-employment became essential for caring for Sophie. But where Vivian had transformed her modest beginning into a billion-dollar enterprise, Marcus had managed only to maintain stability without growth. The next morning required careful orchestration of the logistics that governed his daily life. Sophie needed to be at school by 8, which meant breakfast at 7, getting dressed at 7:30, and leaving by 7:45 to account for traffic. His meeting with Vivian was at 10, which gave him just enough time to drop Sophie off, stop at home to change into his least worn work clothes, and navigate downtown traffic to the Meridian Tech building. Marcus stood in the elevator of the building he had helped save yesterday, acutely aware of how out of place he looked among the suited executives who shared the ride to the upper floors. His work clothes were clean and professional, but they marked him as someone who belonged in mechanical rooms and service corridors, not executive offices. Vivian's office occupied the entire southwest corner of the 40th floor, with views that stretched across Chicago's skyline to Lake Michigan. The space was modern, but not ostentatious, decorated with efficiency rather than excess. The only personal touches were a few photographs on a side table and a collection of what appeared to be vintage computer equipment displayed in a glass case. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming," Vivian said, rising from behind a desk that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. "Please, have a seat. Can I offer you coffee?" Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, needing something to do with his hands, while he figured out why one of Chicago's most successful CEOs wanted to meet with a plumber who operated out of a 10-year-old van. "I'll be direct, Mr. Thompson, because I suspect you appreciate honesty over corporate maneuvering. Yesterday, you demonstrated problem-solving abilities that my entire technical team lacked. You saw a solution that existed outside the parameters of our technological systems, and you had the practical knowledge to implement it immediately." "I've been fixing pipes for 18 years, Marcus replied, unsure where this was leading. "You learn to see past the complicated stuff to the simple solutions that actually work." "Exactly." Vivian leaned forward with intensity that suggested she had found something valuable. "That perspective, that ability to see fundamental solutions that technology obscures, is precisely what Meridian Tech needs. We've become so dependent on complex systems that we've lost sight of basic principles." "Are you offering me a job as your head of maintenance?" Marcus asked, trying to understand what role a plumber could play in a technology company. "I'm offering you something more interesting than that. I want you to join our infrastructure consulting team, but not as a traditional consultant. Your role would be to evaluate our physical systems and identify vulnerabilities that our technological approach might be missing. Yesterday's crisis revealed that we have critical weaknesses in our infrastructure that no amount of smart technology can address." Marcus set down his coffee cup, needing a moment to process this unexpected direction. "Ms. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not a consultant. I'm a plumber. I fix things with my hands, not with PowerPoint presentations and strategic recommendations, which is precisely why you'd be valuable," Vivian countered. "We have plenty of people who can create presentations. What we lack is someone who understands how things actually work beneath all the technology. Someone who can identify problems before they become $50 million disasters." The offer was intriguing, but Marcus thought of Sophie, of the careful schedule that allowed him to be present for her while maintaining his business. "I have a daughter," he said finally, 7 years old. "Her mother died 3 years ago, and I'm all she has. My current work allows me to be flexible for school pickups, sick days, and everything else that comes with single parenthood. A corporate position wouldn't provide that flexibility." Vivian's expression softened slightly, the first crack in her professional demeanor that suggested personal understanding beneath the CEO exterior. "I was raised by a single parent," she said quietly. "My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed after my father left. I understand the juggling act you're performing probably better than most executives would." She paused, seeming to reconsider her approach. "What if we could structure this differently? Part-time consultation, working around your daughter's schedule. You could maintain your plumbing business for the flexibility and steady income it provides while consulting for us on specific projects. The compensation would be significant enough to make the arrangement worthwhile." Marcus found himself genuinely considering the possibility. The additional income could provide opportunities for Sophie that his current situation couldn't afford. Better educational options, extracurricular activities, college savings that consisted of more than good intentions. "What exactly would you need from me?" he asked. "Initially, a comprehensive evaluation of our building's infrastructure, identifying vulnerabilities, and proposing practical solutions that don't rely entirely on technology. Beyond that, we're expanding to 3 other facilities in the next year. Each will need similar assessment and planning. Your perspective could save us millions in potential disasters while improving the reliability of our physical systems." The conversation continued for another hour as Vivian outlined her vision for integrating practical infrastructure knowledge with technological innovation. Marcus found himself drawn into discussions about water pressure dynamics, emergency response protocols, and the critical importance of manual overrides in automated systems. By the time he left Vivian's office, Marcus had agreed to a consulting arrangement that would fundamentally change his and Sophie's financial situation while allowing him to maintain the flexibility that single parenthood required. The contract would be formalized by Meridian Tech's legal department, but the handshake agreement was for 20 hours per week at a rate that exceeded what he typically made in a full week of plumbing work. As he drove to pick up Sophie from school, Marcus reflected on how a routine faucet replacement had transformed into an opportunity that seemed almost too good to be real. His phone rang with calls from the customers he had rescheduled, but now he could afford to be selective about which jobs he took, focusing on those that fit his schedule rather than accepting everything out of financial necessity. Sophie was waiting in the school pickup line, chattering with her friend Emma about an art project they were working on together. When she saw his van, she ran over with her usual enthusiasm, her backpack bouncing and her smile bright despite the cloudy afternoon. "How was your day, Daddy? Did you fix lots of pipes?" Marcus helped her into the van, considering how to explain that their lives might be about to change in ways that would affect her daily routine as much as his. "Actually, sweetheart, something interesting happened. Remember the big building where I've been working? The one with all the computers? The boss there wants me to help them with special projects, making sure their building works properly, even when the computers don't." Sophie considered this information seriously. "Will you still be a plumber?" "Mrs. Patterson says plumbers are essential workers because everyone needs water." "I'll still be a plumber," Marcus assured her. "But I'll also be helping the computer company understand how buildings work without computers. It means I might be able to spend more time with you and less time working on weekends." The mention of more time together immediately captured Sophie's attention. She had never complained about the Saturdays when he had to take emergency calls or the evenings when he worked on estimates while she did homework. But Marcus knew she treasured the time they could spend together without work interrupting. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in their small kitchen, Sophie standing on a stool to reach the counter while she helped make salad, Marcus allowed himself to imagine possibilities that had seemed unreachable just yesterday. Better health insurance that would cover Sophie's asthma medication without crushing copays. The ability to save for her college education. Maybe even a vacation that didn't involve staying with relatives. The consulting agreement with Meridian Tech wouldn't solve all their problems or bring Rebecca back to complete their family, but it offered something Marcus had almost stopped believing in. The chance for upward mobility that hard work alone hadn't been able to provide. 3 weeks into the consulting arrangement, Marcus found himself navigating 2 distinct worlds that seemed to exist in parallel dimensions despite occupying the same city. Mornings were spent at Meridian Tech, examining infrastructure systems with fresh eyes that saw vulnerabilities invisible to engineers who trusted technology over physics. Afternoons belonged to Thompson Plumbing Services, where loyal customers still needed faucets fixed and drains cleared by hands that understood the honest work of maintaining homes. The balance was delicate but manageable, like adjusting water pressure to find the sweet spot between insufficient flow and pipe-damaging force. Sophie had adapted to the new routine with the Resilience Children show when change brings positive outcomes. The after-school program at her school, previously unaffordable, now provided homework help and enrichment activities that she genuinely enjoyed, allowing Marcus to work later on consulting days without guilt. On this particular Thursday morning, Marcus stood in Meridian Tech's newest server room, a $20 million facility that housed the digital infrastructure for half of Chicago's financial institutions. The room hummed with the white noise of cooling systems, working at capacity, maintaining the precise temperature required for optimal performance of equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Vivian stood beside him, having insisted on personally observing his evaluation process, despite a schedule that typically allocated every minute to strategic decisions and stakeholder management. She had begun joining his infrastructure assessments with increasing frequency, claiming she needed to understand the physical systems that supported her digital empire. "Your cooling system is running at 95% capacity," Marcus observed, studying the massive air conditioning units that lined one wall. "That leaves almost no margin for error if something fails." "The system is redundant," replied James Chen, the head of technical operations, who had been assigned to accompany Marcus's evaluations. "If one unit fails, the others can compensate." Marcus walked to the furthest unit and placed his hand on the housing, feeling vibrations that told a story of mechanical stress. These units are all the same age, installed at the same time, maintained on the same schedule. If one fails, the others are likely to follow soon after. They're not truly redundant if they share the same vulnerability window. Vivian made notes on her tablet, but Marcus noticed she was watching him as much as the equipment, studying his methodology with the intensity she usually reserved for analyzing market trends. "What would you recommend?" she asked. "Stagger your replacement schedule. Install units from different manufacturers to avoid systematic failures. Most importantly, add passive cooling elements that don't rely on electricity. Sometimes the old solutions are still the best backup plans." James looked skeptical, the expression of someone who believed technology could solve any problem if properly applied. Passive cooling would require significant structural modifications. The cost would be substantial. Less substantial than losing $20 million in equipment when your cooling system fails during a summer heat wave, Marcus countered calmly. He had learned to present his arguments in terms of risk management rather than mechanical necessity, speaking the language of corporate decision-making while maintaining his practical perspective. As they continued through the facility, Vivian's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages she ignored, a deviation from her usual hyper-responsive communication style. When they reached a section where water pipes ran above critical electrical systems, Marcus stopped abruptly. "This is a disaster waiting to happen," he said flatly. "You've got water mains running directly over your most sensitive equipment with no intermediate barriers. One leak, even a small one, and you're looking at catastrophic failure. The pipes are monitored by sensors that would detect any moisture immediately," James protested. "Sensors can fail." "Sensors did fail in your main building 3 weeks ago," Marcus reminded him. "You can have all the technology you want, but water will always follow gravity. These pipes need to be rerouted, or you need waterproof barriers between them and the equipment below." Vivian studied the configuration with new understanding, seeing the physical reality that existed beneath the technological monitoring systems. Her expression suggested she was reconsidering fundamental assumptions about how her company managed risk. "How did we miss something so obvious?" she asked, though the question seemed directed at herself rather than the men beside her.
"Because you were looking at dashboards instead of pipes," Marcus replied simply. "Technology tells you what's happening, but understanding the physical systems tells you what could happen." After James left to prepare a report on Marcus's recommendations, Vivian remained in the server room, her usual urgency to move to the next meeting apparently suspended. "You see the world differently than anyone I work with," she said, turning to face Marcus directly. Everyone else starts with technology and adds physical infrastructure as necessary. You start with physics and add technology carefully. That's because I've seen what happens when technology fails, Marcus replied. When a pipe bursts at 2 in the morning, you can't fix it with a software update. You need wrenches and knowledge and the strength to turn valves that haven't moved in years.
Vivian smiled slightly, an expression Marcus had noticed appearing more frequently during their interactions. You sound like my mother. She always said that hands-on knowledge was worth more than any degree. Of course, she said that while insisting I get multiple degrees, but I understood her point. The personal revelation surprised Marcus. In 3 weeks of working together, Vivian had maintained professional boundaries with the precision of someone who had learned to separate business from personal life completely. This glimpse beneath her CEO armor felt significant, though Marcus wasn't sure why. Your daughter, Sophie, Vivian continued unexpectedly. You mentioned she's interested in science. Meridian Tech sponsors a youth STEM program on Saturdays. It's designed for children of employees, very hands-on and practical. Sophie would be welcome to participate. Marcus felt the familiar tension between opportunity and protection that characterized his parenting decisions. Sophie would undoubtedly benefit from the program, but it would mean bringing her into this corporate world that felt so distant from their normal life. That's generous, but I'm not technically an employee, he pointed out. You're a valued consultant whose expertise has already identified critical vulnerabilities that could have cost us millions, Vivian countered. I think we can make an exception. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang with the specific ringtone assigned to Sophie's school, the one that always made his heart rate spike with parental concern. Mr. Thompson? This is Mrs. Patterson. Sophie's fine, but there's been an incident with another student, and we need you to come to the school. Marcus felt Vivian watching as he processed this interruption to their professional discussion. I have to go. My daughter needs me. Of course, Vivian replied immediately. Do you need any help? I could have my driver take you if your van is far away. The offer was unexpected and oddly touching, but Marcus shook his head. Thank you, but I've got it. I'll send my infrastructure report by tomorrow morning. As he rushed from the building, Marcus didn't see Vivian remain in the server room, staring at the pipes he had identified as problems with an expression that suggested she was thinking about more than infrastructure vulnerabilities. The elementary school office had the familiar smell of coffee and copy paper that Marcus associated with the numerous meetings he'd attended since becoming Sophie's sole parent. Mrs. Patterson, the principal who had guided him through the worst of his early single parenthood, greeted him with a combination of warmth and concern. Sophie's in the counselor's office, she explained, leading him down the hallway. She's not in trouble, but there was an altercation with another student who made some unfortunate comments about her not having a mother. Marcus felt the familiar surge of protective anger mixed with sorrow that Sophie had to navigate such cruelty at 7 years old. He found her in the counselor's office, sitting in a chair that made her look even smaller than usual, her eyes red from crying, but her chin raised with stubborn pride that reminded him painfully of Rebecca. Hey, sweetheart, he said gently, kneeling beside her chair. Mrs. Patterson told me someone said something mean to you. Sophie nodded, then suddenly threw her arms around his neck, holding on with the fierce desperation of a child who needed reassurance that her remaining parent wasn't going anywhere. Tyler said I was weird because I don't have a mom, she whispered against his shoulder. He said that's why I don't have nice clothes like the other kids, and why you drive an old van instead of a nice car like his dad. Marcus held his daughter tighter, wrestling with the desire to find Tyler's parents and explain exactly what he thought of their child's behavior. Instead, he pulled back enough to look at Sophie's face, seeing Rebecca's strength beneath the tears. Tyler doesn't understand our family, Marcus said carefully. He doesn't know that your mom loved you so much that her love is still with us even though she's gone. He doesn't know that our van might be old, but it's reliable and paid for, which is more important than being fancy. Sophie nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand in a gesture that would have made Rebecca gently remind her about tissues. Mrs. Rodriguez helped, Sophie added, referring to her teacher. She told Tyler that families come in all different shapes, and that having one parent who loves you is better than having two parents who are too busy to pay attention. Mrs. Rodriguez sounds very wise, Marcus agreed, making a mental note to thank the teacher who had defended his daughter. The counselor, a young woman named Jennifer who had started at the school this year, joined their conversation with professional gentleness that Marcus appreciated, even while recognizing its calculated nature. Sophie handled the situation very maturely, she said. She didn't respond with anger or mean words of her own. She simply told Tyler that he didn't know what he was talking about and walked away to find a teacher. Marcus felt pride in his daughter's restraint, knowing how difficult it must have been to not lash out when hurt. That was very grown up of you, Sophie. Your mom would be proud of how you handled yourself. They spent another 20 minutes in the counselor's office discussing strategies for dealing with future comments and reassuring Sophie that she had done nothing wrong. By the time they left, Sophie seemed steadier, though Marcus knew the wound would take time to fully heal. As they walked to his van, Sophie slipped her small hand into his, a gesture that had become less frequent as she grew older and more independent. "Daddy, are we poor?" she asked suddenly, the question apparently weighing on her since Tyler's comments. Marcus considered how to answer honestly without burdening her with adult concerns. "We're not poor, sweetheart. We have everything we need: a safe home, good food, clothes that keep us warm, and most importantly, we have each other. Some people have more money than us, and some have less, but money doesn't determine a family's value." Sophie seemed to process this information with the serious consideration she brought to all important matters. Mrs. Rodriguez said that rich isn't about money. It's about love and kindness and helping others. Mrs. Rodriguez is absolutely right, Marcus confirmed, though he also understood the practical reality that love didn't pay for Sophie's asthma medication or save for her college education. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus sat at his kitchen table working on the infrastructure report for Meridian Tech. His laptop displayed detailed recommendations for preventing the kind of catastrophic failure that had nearly occurred 3 weeks ago, but his mind kept returning to the conversation with Sophie about their financial situation. The consulting arrangement with Meridian Tech had improved their circumstances significantly, but they were still far from the economic security that would protect Sophie from classmates who equated worth with wealth. Marcus had grown up in similar circumstances, understanding viscerally how poverty could limit opportunities despite hard work and good intentions. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Marcus Thompson, this is Vivian Sterling. I wanted to check that everything was okay with your daughter. If you need to adjust your consulting schedule to address family matters, please don't hesitate to let me know." Marcus stared at the message, surprised by both the personal concern and the fact that Vivian had his cell phone number. He typed back a simple response. "Everything's fine. Thank you for asking." Sophie had a difficult day, but we worked through it. The 3 dots indicating Vivian was typing appeared and disappeared several times before her response came through. Being a single parent must require extraordinary strength. If there's anything Meridian Tech can do to support you, please let me know. Marcus wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected offer of support from someone who existed in such a different economic stratum. Before he could formulate a reply, another message appeared. "The STEM program I mentioned starts this Saturday. The first session is about water systems and infrastructure. Sophie might enjoy seeing how her father's knowledge translates into science education." The connection between his work and the educational opportunity for Sophie was thoughtfully made, suggesting Vivian had put genuine consideration into the offer rather than making it as a casual corporate benefit. "I'll ask Sophie if she's interested," Marcus replied, though he suspected his daughter would be thrilled by the opportunity to participate in a program with hands-on science activities. The next morning, Marcus presented the idea to Sophie over breakfast, watching her face light up with excitement that chased away the shadows from yesterday's incident at school. "Really? I could go to a science program at the big building where you work?" Sophie asked. her spoon suspended halfway to her mouth, dripping milk from her cereal. "If you want to," Marcus confirmed. "It's every Saturday morning for 3 hours. You'd learn about how buildings work, how water systems operate, things like that." Sophie's enthusiasm was infectious as she peppered him with questions about what she would learn, who would teach it, whether other kids her age would be there. Marcus realized this program could provide not just education, but also social connections with children whose parents worked in technology, potentially expanding Sophie's world beyond their working-class neighborhood. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Chicago morning that made spring feel like an empty promise. Marcus drove Sophie to Meridian Tech, noting her unusual silence as they approached the gleaming building that represented a world so different from their usual environment. "You nervous, sweetheart?" he asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "A little," Sophie admitted. "What if the other kids are all smarter than me because their parents work with computers?" Marcus pulled into the parking garage, then turned to face his daughter directly. "Sophie, you're one of the smartest kids I know. You understand how things work because you pay attention and ask good questions. That's more important than knowing about computers." The STEM program was held on the 5th floor in a space that had been transformed into an educational laboratory. Children ranging from 6 to 12 were already gathering, their parents lingering with the familiar reluctance of delivering their kids to a new experience. Marcus was surprised to see Vivian standing near the registration table, dressed casually in jeans and a Meridian Tech STEM program t-shirt rather than her usual business attire. She was speaking with one of the instructors, but looked up as Marcus and Sophie approached, offering a genuine smile that transformed her face from corporate authority to something more approachable. "Sophie, I'm so glad you could join us," Vivian said, addressing the child directly rather than speaking over her head to Marcus. "Today we're going to learn about how water gets to all the different floors of tall buildings. Your dad is an expert on that." Sophie beamed with pride at the recognition of her father's expertise. "He fixes pipes and makes sure water goes where it's supposed to go," she informed Vivian seriously. "That's exactly right," Vivian confirmed. "And that knowledge is just as important as understanding computers. Buildings need both to work properly." As Sophie joined the other children, Marcus lingered uncertainly, unsure whether parents were expected to stay or leave. Vivian seemed to sense his hesitation. "Parents are welcome to observe if they'd like," she said. "We have a viewing area with coffee and workspace if you need to catch up on anything while Sophie's in the program." Marcus accepted the invitation, curious to see how the program operated and wanting to be available if Sophie needed him. The parent observation area was comfortable but separate, allowing children independence while keeping adults close enough for security. To his surprise, Vivian joined him after ensuring the program was running smoothly, carrying 2 cups of coffee with the casual assumption that he would want one. "You don't have to babysit the parents," Marcus said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I'm not babysitting," Vivian replied, settling into a chair beside him. "I actually enjoy watching these sessions. Children approach problems so differently than adults. They don't have preconceptions about what's impossible." They watched through the observation window as an instructor demonstrated water pressure using tubes and pumps, the children gathering around with eager curiosity. Sophie was right in front, her hand shooting up with questions that made the instructor smile. "She's not afraid to engage," Vivian observed. "That's a valuable trait." "She gets that from her mother," Marcus said quietly. Rebecca was never afraid to ask questions or challenge assumptions. It got her in trouble sometimes, but it also made her an excellent nurse. The mention of his late wife came naturally, surprising Marcus with its ease. He rarely spoke about Rebecca with anyone outside their immediate circle, but something about Vivian's presence invited honesty rather than the careful professional distance he usually maintained. "Tell me about her," Vivian said gently, the request carrying genuine interest rather than polite conversation. Marcus watched Sophie through the observation window as she carefully assembled pipes according to the instructor's demonstration, her small hands working with the same methodical precision he tried to teach her in everything she did. Rebecca was a pediatric nurse at Chicago General, he began, surprised by his willingness to share these memories with someone who had been a stranger just weeks ago. We met when I was installing new water heaters in the children's wing. She caught me explaining to a young patient how the pipes in the walls were like veins, carrying water instead of blood through the building. She said anyone who could make infrastructure interesting to a sick child deserved a coffee break. Vivian smiled at the story, her attention completely focused on Marcus rather than the phone that usually commanded her constant vigilance. We were married 2 years later, Marcus continued. Sophie came along 3 years after that. Rebecca insisted on working until the day before delivery, said the kids at the hospital needed her more than she needed rest. That was just who she was, always putting others first. The memories flowed more easily than Marcus expected, perhaps because Vivian listened without the sympathy that usually made such conversations unbearable. She simply absorbed the information with the same attention she brought to analyzing business strategies. The cancer diagnosis came when Sophie was 4, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the weight of the memory, aggressive and already advanced by the time we caught it. Rebecca fought for 18 months, not for herself, but for Sophie. She spent her last good days recording videos for Sophie's future birthdays, graduations, wedding day. Said she wanted to be there somehow for all the moments she'd miss. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, watching the children in the program work with their pipe assemblies. That kind of love leaves a permanent impression, she observed finally. I see it in how Sophie approaches the world with curiosity and kindness despite experiencing such loss so young. Marcus nodded, grateful for the understanding that didn't require response. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Sophie help another child who was struggling with a connection. Her natural inclination to assist others evident even at 7. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus ventured, emboldened by the personal nature of their conversation. "Of course," Vivian replied. "Why do you run these programs yourself? You could easily hire someone to manage community outreach. This seems very hands-on for a CEO of your level." Vivian considered the question, her fingers absently turning the coffee cup in her hands. "My mother cleaned offices at night so she could be home when I got back from school during the day. She'd take me with her sometimes when she couldn't afford a babysitter. I'd do homework in empty boardrooms while she vacuumed and emptied trash cans." The parallel to Marcus's situation wasn't lost on either of them, though Vivian continued without drawing explicit attention to it. "One night, an executive was working late and found me in his office doing calculus homework. Instead of having us thrown out, he spent an hour helping me understand derivatives. That single hour of attention from someone in power changed my perspective on what was possible for my life. These programs are my way of providing that same window of possibility for other children." Marcus absorbed this revelation, understanding Vivian differently now. Her success hadn't been inherited or easily won, but built from circumstances not so different from what he and Sophie faced. The program session was concluding, children excitedly showing their parents the pipe systems they had constructed. Sophie ran over with her project, a complex arrangement that demonstrated water pressure principles with impressive accuracy. "Look, Daddy, I made water go uphill using pressure, just like you explained about the tall buildings," Sophie announced proudly, then noticed Vivian standing beside him. "Miss Vivian, do you want to see?" "I would love to see," Vivian replied with enthusiasm that seemed genuine rather than polite. Sophie launched into a detailed explanation of her project, using terminology she had learned that morning, but applying concepts Marcus had been teaching her informally for years. Vivian asked questions that encouraged Sophie to think deeper about the principles involved, treating the 7-year-old's understanding with respect that delighted the child. "You should be an engineer," Vivian suggested. "You clearly have the mind for it." Sophie's face lit up, then clouded slightly. "Tyler says girls can't be engineers, that we're only good at easy jobs." Marcus felt his jaw clench at another mention of the boy who seemed determined to undermine Sophie's confidence, but Vivian responded before he could. "Tyler is wrong. Vivian said firmly. I'm an engineer, and I run this entire company. My head of security is a woman who used to be in the Army Corps of Engineers. My lead software architect is a woman who holds 12 patents. Anyone who says girls can't be engineers is either ignorant or scared of competition. Sophie absorbed this information with the intensity of a child reconstructing their worldview. You're an engineer and the boss? Both, Vivian confirmed. Engineering taught me how to solve problems, and being the boss lets me decide which problems are worth solving. As they prepared to leave, Sophie carrying her pipe project carefully like a treasure, Vivian touched Marcus's arm lightly to hold him back for a moment. There's a company event next Friday evening, she said quietly. A reception for our major clients and partners. I know it's not your usual scene, but I'd like you to attend. You could bring Sophie if you can't arrange childcare. It's fairly informal, and there will be other children there. Marcus hesitated, aware of the social distance between his world and the corporate reception Vivian was describing. I appreciate the invitation, but I'm not sure we'd fit in with that crowd. You saved this company $50 million and identified vulnerabilities that could have cost us even more, Vivian countered. You belong there more than half the people who will attend just because their companies have contracts with us. The argument was persuasive, but Marcus still felt uncertain about inserting himself and Sophie into Vivian's professional world beyond their consulting arrangement. Think about it, Vivian said, seeming to sense his reservations. The invitation stands either way. That weekend, Marcus found himself thinking about the reception while he and Sophie worked on their Saturday routine of grocery shopping and laundry. The mundane domesticity of their life felt increasingly distant from the world Vivian had opened to them. Yet Marcus wasn't sure if bridging that gap was wise or even possible. Sophie, however, had no such reservations. She had been talking non-stop about the STEM program and Miss Vivian since Saturday, weaving the experience into her play and conversations with the authority of someone who had discovered profound truth. Daddy, could we go to the party at Miss Vivian's work? Sophie asked over dinner, having overheard enough of the invitation to understand its basic nature. I promise I'll be good and wear my nice dress. Marcus looked at his daughter's eager face and realized his hesitation was more about his own insecurities than what was best for Sophie. Exposure to different environments and people would benefit her, even if it made him uncomfortable. We can go for a little while, he agreed, earning a delighted squeal from Sophie. The week passed with unusual anticipation. Marcus continued his consulting work at Meridian Tech, but his interactions with Vivian had shifted subtly since their conversation during the STEM program. She sought his input not just on infrastructure issues, but on broader operational decisions, valuing his perspective in ways that suggested growing respect for his analytical abilities. Thursday afternoon, while reviewing plans for a new facility Meridian Tech was constructing, Vivian asked an unexpected question. Do you ever regret not pursuing engineering formally? You clearly have the aptitude for it. Marcus considered the question seriously. When I was younger, I might have. But everything I've done led to Sophie, and I wouldn't change anything that brought her into my life. Besides, formal education isn't the only way to understand how things work. Vivian nodded thoughtfully. You're right, of course. I sometimes forget that, given how much my degrees open doors for me. But you've shown me that practical knowledge has value that academic training often misses. The conversation was interrupted by James Chen, who entered with concerns about the new facility's cooling system design. Marcus listened to the technical specifications, then identified a flaw that both James and Vivian had overlooked. You're running your calculations based on average heat generation, but you need to factor in peak loads during backup cycles. The system will be overwhelmed during precisely the moments when you can least afford failure. James pulled up his laptop, running new calculations, with the variables Marcus had identified. His expression shifted from skepticism to concern, as the results confirmed Marcus's assessment. He's right. We'd have a 15-minute window of critical vulnerability every time the backup system's engaged. How did you see that without running the numbers? Because I felt rooms get hot when too many systems kick in at once, Marcus replied simply. You can calculate theoretical heat dissipation all day, but until you've stood in a mechanical room during a full system test, you don't really understand how heat actually behaves. Friday evening arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made Chicago forgive winter's brutality. Marcus stood before his closet, examining his limited options for appropriate attire. He owned one suit, purchased for Rebecca's funeral and worn only for the rare occasions that demanded formal dress. Sophie appeared in his doorway, wearing her best dress, a navy blue garment with small white flowers that Rebecca had bought just months before her diagnosis. It still fit, though barely, a reminder of how quickly children grew and how many moments Rebecca was missing. "Do I look okay, Daddy?" Sophie asked, spinning to make the skirt flare out. "You look beautiful, sweetheart. Just like your mom when she dressed up." Sophie beamed at the comparison, then studied Marcus's suit critically. "You look handsome too, but your tie is crooked." Marcus let her adjust his tie, standing still while her small fingers worked to straighten it with the serious concentration she brought to important tasks. The domestic moment felt both ordinary and profound, a reminder of all the small intimacies that compose their life together. The reception was held in Meridian Tech's top-floor event space, a room Marcus had never seen during his infrastructure assessments. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Chicago at sunset, the city spreading out like a glowing map of possibilities. Marcus and Sophie entered hesitantly, immediately aware of their outsider status among the elegant crowd of executives and entrepreneurs who moved through the space with practiced social confidence. Sophie pressed closer to Marcus's side, her earlier enthusiasm dampened by the reality of the unfamiliar environment. "Mr. Thompson, you made it!" Vivian approached them with genuine warmth that eased some of Marcus's tension. She wore an elegant black cocktail dress that managed to be both professional and stunning, a departure from her usual business attire that Marcus found unexpectedly affecting. "And Sophie, you look absolutely lovely," Vivian continued, addressing the child with the respect that had won Sophie's affection from their first meeting. "Thank you, Miss Vivian," Sophie replied, confidence returning under Vivian's attention. "Your party is very fancy." Vivian laughed, a genuine sound that drew glances from nearby executives who rarely saw their CEO display such unguarded emotion. "It is fancy, isn't it? Sometimes I think we make things fancier than necessary. Come on, let me introduce you to some people who would love to hear about your pipe pressure project from last Saturday." Vivian guided them through the reception with skill that made their integration feel natural rather than forced. She introduced Marcus as the consultant who had saved the company from catastrophic flooding, immediately establishing his credentials in terms the assembled executives could appreciate. Sophie charmed everyone she met with her combination of intelligence and innocence, asking questions about their work with genuine curiosity that adults found refreshing in an environment typically dominated by calculated networking. "Your daughter is remarkable," commented Eleanor Hastings, a venture capitalist who had been interrogating Marcus about his infrastructure methodology. "Such poise for someone so young." Marcus watched Sophie explaining her understanding of water systems to a group of engineers who seemed genuinely impressed by her grasp of basic principles. "She gets that from her mother," he said with quiet pride. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself relaxing into conversations that challenged him intellectually in ways his usual work didn't provide. These were people who solved complex problems for a living, and they recognized his analytical abilities regardless of his blue-collar presentation. Vivian remained nearby throughout the reception, subtly facilitating Marcus's interactions while ensuring Sophie felt included and comfortable. When Sophie began to tire, Vivian suggested they visit her office where Sophie could rest on the couch while the adults continued their conversations. The office felt different at night, city lights creating patterns on the walls that transformed the corporate space into something more intimate. Sophie curled up on the leather couch with a blanket Vivian produced from a closet, falling asleep within minutes, despite the unfamiliar environment. "She trusts you," Marcus observed, watching his daughter sleep peacefully in Vivian's office. "That means a great deal to me," Vivian replied softly. "Sophie's trust isn't given lightly, I imagine." They stood together at the windows, looking out at the city below, the reception continuing in the distance, but feeling irrelevant compared to this quiet moment. "Can I tell you something?" Vivian asked, her voice carrying vulnerability that Marcus had never heard from her before. "Of course. I've built this entire company, created wealth beyond what my mother could have imagined when she was cleaning these same types of offices. But watching you with Sophie, seeing how you've built a life centered on love rather than achievement, I realize I might have been measuring success incorrectly." Marcus turned to study her profile against the city lights, seeing past the CEO exterior to someone questioning fundamental assumptions about their life. "Success isn't just one thing," he said gently. "You've created opportunities for hundreds of employees, developed technology that serves millions. That matters too. But at the end of the day, I go home to an empty apartment with no one to share my victories or defeats with," Vivian countered. "You go home to Sophie, who celebrates your existence regardless of what you've accomplished that day." The observation hung between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to fully explore. Marcus felt the pull of something beyond professional respect, an attraction complicated by their vastly different circumstances and the responsibilities they both carried. A sound from the couch interrupted the moment as Sophie stirred, mumbling something in her sleep about water pressure and engineering. Both adults smiled, the tension breaking into something warmer and more manageable. "We should probably get her home," Marcus said, though he was reluctant to end this unexpected intimacy. "Let me have my driver take you," Vivian offered. "It's late, and she needs proper rest." Marcus began to protest, but Vivian's expression suggested this was important to her beyond mere logistics. "Please," she said simply, "let me do this small thing for you after everything you've done for my company." The ride home in Vivian's town car was surreal, Sophie sleeping against Marcus's shoulder while the city passed by outside tinted windows. The driver navigated to their apartment without needing directions, a detail that suggested Vivian had prepared for this possibility. As Marcus carried Sophie up to their apartment, he wondered how their lives had become entangled with Vivian Sterling's world so quickly and completely. 3 weeks ago, he had been a simple plumber fixing a faucet. Now he was consulting for a major corporation while his daughter attended programs with children of executives and entrepreneurs. Inside their modest apartment, Marcus tucked Sophie into bed, removing her party dress carefully and replacing it with pajamas without waking her. She murmured something about Miss Vivian being nice before settling back into deep sleep. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Thank you for coming tonight. You and Sophie brought something special to an event that usually feels like an obligation. I hope we can do this again soon." Marcus stared at the message, recognizing an invitation that extended beyond professional collaboration into something more personal and potentially complicated. He thought of Rebecca, wondering what she would think of this successful woman who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. The weekend brought unexpected developments when Marcus arrived at his Saturday morning plumbing calls to find several requests from Meridian Tech employees who had met him at the reception. Word had apparently spread that the consultant who had saved the company was also an excellent plumber who could be trusted with residential work. By noon, Marcus had scheduled enough new clients to fill his available slots for the next month, all offering to pay premium rates for his services. The irony wasn't lost on him that his blue-collar work had become desirable because of his white-collar connections. Sophie spent the morning at the STEM program, which had become the highlight of her week. When Marcus picked her up, she was bubbling with excitement about a new friend she had made, a girl named Chen, whose mother worked in Meridian Tech's accounting department. "Can Chen come to our house sometime?" Sophie asked hopefully. She wants to see my rock collection and meet Mr. Whiskers. Mr. Whiskers was their elderly cat, a stray they had adopted shortly after Rebecca's death, when Sophie had desperately needed something to care for and love. We can ask her parents, Marcus agreed, though he wondered about the social dynamics of playdates between children from such different economic backgrounds. That afternoon, while Sophie played with her rocks and drew pictures of pipeline systems, Marcus received an unexpected call from Vivian. "I hope I'm not interrupting your weekend," she began, a note of uncertainty in her voice that seemed foreign to her usual confidence. Just watching Sophie reorganize her rock collection for the 100th time, Marcus replied, smiling at his daughter's serious concentration as she arranged specimens by color and texture. "I wanted to apologize if I overstepped last night," Vivian continued. "I realize I might have put you in an uncomfortable position by insisting you attend the reception." Marcus was surprised by the apology, having not perceived any overreach in Vivian's behavior. "You didn't overstep. Sophie and I both enjoyed ourselves. It was good for her to see that world, to understand that there are different paths to success." There was a pause before Vivian spoke again. "I also wanted to ask you something, and please feel free to say no. My mother is visiting next weekend. She still lives in the apartment where I grew up, refuses to let me move her somewhere nicer. She insists on cooking Sunday dinner, and I thought perhaps you and Sophie might join us. My mother would love to meet the man who saved her daughter's company." The invitation was unexpectedly personal, introducing family into what had been a carefully managed professional relationship with personal undertones. Marcus considered the implications of meeting Vivian's mother, of further intertwining their lives beyond the boundaries of consultant and client.